Hi, I'm David.
And I'm AJ.
And this is the Forgotten Usagi. And this is something new that we're trying. This is a podcast slash video chat thing that I'm doing with my good friend AJ. And we're kind of hoping to evolve this into some interesting directions. Right now, we're just doing a pre-recorded version, but ultimately we're hoping to grow this into something that goes live once a week, maybe on something like Twitch, so that people can chime in and we can have live interaction with people that are watching. But we're doing a pre-recorded thing first so we can kind of get our ducks in a row because we're a little disorganized and this is a new field for us. I have no idea how this is actually going to turn out. And that's actually a good point because I want to hear all of you guys' opinions and thoughts on how this goes. Now, it is important to note that you're watching this on a Sunday, but this is not going to be a Sunday thing. This first episode is just going up on my usual upload time because I wanted to get the word out and get feedback from people so we know how to build this correctly. Normally, this will probably go up on a Wednesday, and it will not supplant the regular Sunday video. The only reason that it's supplanting the Sunday video this week is because I am in Dubai. I mean, obviously, I'm not in Dubai right now. I'm still in Texas. I leave for Dubai in like 3 days. So we're recording this
But by the time you're watching this...
By the time you're watching this, I will be in Dubai, and it's awfully hard to film electronic stuff in Dubai because that is a very long way from home. So this is just kind of a temporary stand-in, and if you guys have any opinions, any thoughts, anything you want to add to this to direct us on how to build it better, leave a comment below. Now, a lot of people, well, hopefully you all know who I am because this is showing up on my channel, but maybe you don't know who AJ is. So AJ, why don't you tell us who you are and what it is that you do?
All right. Well, my name is AJ, and I guess I'm here in the capacity of my YouTube channel and my brand called Forgotten Machines, which is all about machines that most people just simply don't cover.
We're very familiar with that.
I know you are, but see, that's one of the reasons that you and I gravitated toward each other, and one of the reasons I was instantly, magnetically, attracted towards you and your channel and everything you had, because I instantly saw every single thing that you do fits into my category of Forgotten Machines.
That's right, and vice versa, right?
Yeah, and possibly, right? But my reach is a little bit more broad than yours, which is probably why it's a little bit more discombobulated, but we'll get to that. No. Oh,
no, my reach is pretty broad, my man.
There's a reason we're seeing a banner behind me and your actual studio behind you. There's a reason we're seeing that.
Anyways, keep going. Tell us who you are.
So, a lot of you, if you've ever seen me before, you probably know me more as one of the world's 2 Knight Rider historians. Because, we actually do have a YouTube channel called the Knight Rider Historians Official, where we talk about all things that crazy 80s television show that aired in the United States from 1982 to 1986 about an indestructible car that talked and drove itself way back in 1982. And while that's no big deal today except for the indestructible part, a lot of the things we talk about on our Knight Rider Historians channel has to do with the cars. But if that actually is something that got me into what is now Forgotten Machines, because about 10 years ago, a little bit more than 10 years ago, we had an opportunity to meet with the organization, the people who started the organization that actually procured and placed the automobiles into that television show, and a lot of other TV and movie shows of the time. It was called the Vista Group. And once we got to know them and a little bit more comfortable with them and they with us, we started to ask them some questions like, hey, do you happen to have the vehicle identification numbers, the VINs, for any of these cars that you actually placed in the show? We figured some of them out, but we'd kind of like a full list, and you were the guys who did that, so you're the ones that's going to have that. And they said, no, but we actually should have that on this old computer we used to have, and we actually still have it in storage. They actually produce this computer out of storage, and, you think it's a vintage computer that might be well known, like an Apple II or an IBM PC. No, it's something called the Convergent Technologies Mighty Frame. Never heard of it? You're not alone. There it is, the logo right there, and it turns out that the internet had absolutely nothing on this machine whatsoever. And Joe and I, the other Knight Rider historian, Joe and I said, it's actually really important we get the data off of this, because one of the most important things we could do at this stage as Knight Rider historians is to get the vehicle identification numbers for those cars. So I spent the next 3 years becoming what ended up being the world expert on not only that machine, but also how data was encoded in non-standard formats on something called QIC cartridges, and I should have one of those within reach, but I don't right now. And over that period of time, I figured out how to get all of the data off of that machine, and actually the backup tapes for a machine that this company had previous to that called the .4 Iris, and it turns out to also have been a completely forgotten machine. The internet had absolutely nothing on it whatsoever. It turned out to be a derivative of a Data General Nova, but a very distant cousin. And so once again, I kind of had to become a world expert on these things and become self-taught. But in the process, I realized that figuring out all of these things about machines that the internet has nothing on was actually quite a thrill for me, and I really enjoyed doing it, particularly as it came to decoding data formats on magnetic media and other media that really weren't well understood and well documented, and you couldn't just put in, you couldn't just put in a floppy disk and read it like even an old IBM PC floppy disk. That's still pretty easy to do today, all things considered, for somebody who's done anything with vintage computers. No, all of this stuff is much harder than that.
Okay, so that actually leads into a topic that I do want to talk about, disk drives. But before we get into that, random Knight Rider question: the light bar on kit that goes back and forth on the front. How did they build that? What's in that? Is it a 555 timer? Tell me they used a 555. It better be a 555.
Yes and no. There were two versions of that light. The first version actually used a 555 timer and a 6809 Motorola processor.
Oh, ooh, they went fancy on it. All right.
The second version, which was much simpler for reliability purposes and so that multiple special effects people can manage it more easily. The second version was much more dumbed down and did not use a 555 timer.
All right. Well, okay. And it didn't use a 6809 processor either?
Didn't use any processor whatsoever. It was a simple counter, but it wasn't a 555 timer. As a matter of fact, I probably could. We have not, but even to our public, we have not released those circuits, ironically. But it is a relevant question, so you deserve an answer, and your audience deserves an answer. And, because of this, we might end up doing an exclusive on that particular channel.
All right, so that'll be something to look forward to. But
that will be something to look forward to.
Going back to data,
yes,
I am not unfamiliar with lost data formats. The Centurion famously on the channel uses a very strange data format. The disk packs, for example, I have one right here, actually. We'll pull it out. If I can figure out how to open it. There we go. This big guy right here. This is a 14-inch disk pack. You can see the hard platter in there. And there's a couple of interesting things to know about it. This is 5 megabytes, 5 megabytes. 2.5 on the top, 2.5 on the bottom. But if you look on the bottom of the disk pack here, you can see little notches in this wheel around it. So this is the sectoring ring, right? And you've got a double notch up here that's the index pulse, and then you've got 16 sectors all the way around it. So Centurion uses 16 sectors that are hard sectored. Now, the Hawk drive could be set up in a multitude of different ways. You could set it up from, I think, as low as 1 sector all the way up to 64 sectors hard sectored, or you could go soft sectoring. The Hawk drive was pretty malleable in that sense. But Centurion went with 16 sectors, and to make matters even more confusing, they went with 400 bytes per sector. Now that is a strange size, and we haven't figured out exactly why they chose that size. We still think it has to do with the Lytton paper tape modules or the Sykes tape drive that were used on the very old original systems. Apparently the Sykes tape drive was only capable of 400 bytes per block on the tape, and so that filtered its way into Centurion, maybe. But we're not unfamiliar with these very strange data formats. Now, that's still MFM encoding on this, even though it is a very strange format beyond that.
Is it MFM? Is it MFM or is it FM?
It's actually, I'm pretty sure it's MFM on the on the big boy, on the Hawk here, but I'm not 100% sure. But I know for a fact that on the floppies it's MFM, because we have done quite a lot of reverse engineering on the floppies.
Oh, yeah. The floppies would make sense, yeah. Oh, those are 8 inches, though, right?
This is an 8-inch floppy. I'm not endorsed by Verbatim. This
None of us are.
No, this is an 8-inch floppy, and this is where my question for you comes from, because I'm quite familiar with the 16 sectors hard sectored, but when they went to floppies, they didn't go hard sectored. They actually went over to soft sectored. So I mean, you can see that if you spin this around, there's only one hole that comes through the little index hole up here. So it's a soft sectored floppy. They did make hard sector floppies, but Centurion didn't use them. And this uses 20 sectors per track, which is again very strange. The Finch floppy controller card does all of the internal translation. It's bonkers. But my question for you, AJ, and maybe you can answer this, is that every time I see a floppy image, whether it's this one that happens to be 20 sectors or it's a completely different size, doesn't matter whether it's IBM or not, you have the collection of sectors, you have your index here, and you have your collection of sectors going around in a circle, and then there's always a dead zone at the end there. Between the last sector and the index pulse that starts the next sector. And it's never a full sector size worth of dead zone. It's about half a sector size worth of dead zone. It kind of varies depending on the format that you went with. But why the dead zone? Why not actually extend the sectors in such a way that it lines up a little cleaner, like you would do with a hard sector drive that has the sectors very evenly, cleanly distributed all the way around?
Well, so the simple answer is, in real life, they might actually be aligned that way. Because when you say when I see an image of a floppy disk, how are you looking at that?
This is
you're not looking at the floppy.
raw bit stream that we got off of reading an HFE in or something like that through a Grease Weasel or some other thing.
Well, I've never looked at this that closely. But usually the most common visual representation of the sectors on a disk, in the order of tracks that end up looking like nice slices of pie, usually when there's an index pulse involved. That visual representation, the graphic representation, is made by a program that we call HXC.
Yes, that's
which actually makes a floppy emulator, but their software is absolutely fantastic. Now, I believe that gap is more a function of how HXC renders the visual representation of that data across the track, rather than the way it really is on the physical disk. Now, and just as I'm talking, because nobody's ever asked me that before, just as I'm talking, it becomes evident to me that we should be able to measure that very simply by capturing the data pulses on one single track of a floppy. And
especially if it was
the
a
gaps.
known data track. If we just filled that track with nothing but like FF or something like that, right?
Well, it doesn't matter what you fill it with, because it's always going to be evident to be able to see. There's in a sector, you have the sector header, then you have the sector data, and then you have the space between sectors, which is usually a preamble and postamble. In other words, it's never actually a gap. It's actually it's the phase lock loop clock, where the data pulses just keep going. And that's one of the reasons that I like, if I really want to know what's going on, I like to hook up a modern logic capture device. Let's see if I have one within reach. Right here. Chinese knockoff of a Saley logic capture device. They're $12 from China. Anyway, the reason I bring that up is because I can capture the data stream and look at it basically on a graph where we could actually see the timing of everything. And you could actually see all of the data, every single data pulse across the entire track. And so we can measure the gaps between the sectors. Let's say let's skip interleave for a moment. Let's say sectors go 0 through 19, right, for 20 sectors on your example.
Yeah, 0 through 19.
Well, let's say between sector 20 and sector 20 and sector 0, or sector 19 and sector 0, we measure that distance. Now, if that distance is the same as all the other sectors, then now we have good evidence to show that we're simply looking at the way that HXC is visually representing that in their graphic versus the way it really is on the disk.
Okay. So I never thought it might be an artifact of the software displaying it in an interesting way as opposed to how it's actually laid out on the disk.
I have a feeling it actually is laid out on the disk where that's a little bit longer. I just don't think it's as much longer as HXC makes it look in the graphic representation of it.
Yeah, because I mean, it looks like, in the graphical representation, it looks like a solid half sector's worth of no man's space.
So now, because you brought that up, we're going to actually have to do a video showing.
Yeah, we're going to have to figure that out.
That whole thing.
That's a good question. Or maybe somebody in the comments knows for sure. So
maybe they do, but now I want to see it for myself.
Yeah.
Show me the actual data.
Yeah. Now, because it's interesting that you mentioned the logic capture off of one of the Saley devices or whatever they're called, because I actually have a logic capture from the Hawk drive on one of those devices, and you can clearly see the 16 sectors are very evenly spaced. It's just like sectors, like it stands out like night and day, and so that would be a very interesting way to do it on a floppy as well. I'm not sure where we would pull it off on the floppy.
Oh,
whether
the
it would be better
data
to get it,
pulse.
Yeah, it's just straight out of the drive, I guess, right?
It's a single line. Every floppy I've ever seen, it's just a single line for the data pulse.
Yeah,
I could probably even tell you what pin it is.
That makes it easy.
Depending on your drive.
Now we got to do that.
Yes, we do.
We're doing science.
That's what it is. It's actual science. And so that kind of dispels some of the myths where, people, we're always told that this is the way things are, and so they think that this is the way things are. But when you actually test, you realize that it might be a little bit different. And the reason that general knowledge became that general knowledge is because of the environment that we had in years past. But now we don't have that environment anymore. We have easy access to technology that can show us the way it really is, whereas before it didn't matter.
There's another, while we're on the topic of floppies, this is actually a video that's coming up when I get around to working on the Micro Plus again, that's over in Tennessee. One of the things that we wanted to do, because the Micro Plus is in a museum environment and it needs to be turned on in the morning and pretty much stay on all day. And having a Finch drive in there is, I don't know if I would trust a Finch drive to live all day for a year straight or whatnot, right?
Well, there's only one answer to that.
Yeah, well, to watch it die spectacularly.
No!
That's what we're trying to avoid. So we were thinking we could maybe modify the microcode on the Finch floppy controller to cut floppy seek times down to essentially instantaneous, and then hook up a floppy emulator like a GoTech.
Yes, exactly.
So we know how to modify the microcode. We've done it before. Getting those seek times down to nothing is no big deal. We just need a breakout board and we change out one ROM. Boom, Bob's your uncle. We've got seek times that are like instantaneous pretty much. The trick that we ran into, the problem that we ran into though, was that we pulled off from one of these big 8-inch floppies, we pulled off a full-on image from one of these that was an HFE raw flux image. We dropped it onto the GoTech. The system boots up, the system sees it, but as soon as you get to track 43, I want to say is what it was, it suddenly can't write anymore. Fails. Whole thing dies. You can't format it on that thing. You can't do anything. You can't write past 43. Now I know what happens at 43, but AJ, do you know what happens at 43?
Yeah. The timing changes. Something changes so that the inner tracks, which take up less physical space on the disk, are somehow written differently. Either the timing is compressed, or the number of sector changes. Some parameter changes, and the emulator doesn't know how to do that because the emulator is designed to keep the same architecture across the entire disk, track 0 through 79 or whatever it is. And I've run into this problem a number of times before, where real magnetic media is beautiful in the way that it is a complete blank slate. It has no requirements for what you put on it. You can put anything you want on it. And as long as the hardware that wrote it can, as long as you have hardware that can read what that hardware or its companion hardware wrote, then it works.
You're good to go. You're excellent. So the Centurion was doing write precompensation for those inner tracks because the speed of the media is different the closer you get to the center of the spindle. Obviously, because it's a big honking disk, right? the speed is going to change depending on your position to the spindle, right? So they change how they write the flux down on the magnetic material, and they change how they read it back. And the emulator was falling on its face, and we overcame it.
So I actually have
the emulator.
I believe this, and I actually published a video on my YouTube channel, Forgotten Machines, that actually shows me doing this with the Convergent Technologies AWS machine. But we'll get that later. I just had to throw that in there.
So, but how did you overcome it? Because I didn't, I'm not smart enough to overcome this. A member of my Discord, MX Shift, overcame it in the most epic
he's just epic ways. He really is epic.
Well, yeah. So the way that he overcame it was he got into the Flash Floppy firmware that's on the GoTech. So we're running Flash Floppy. And he wrote a software phase lock loop that controls the bit timing of the emulated floppy based upon the track position. And it does this using wizardry and sorcery and software insanity. And I'm going to go into very heavy detail about this in a future episode. I have 4 pages of notes from talking with MX Shift about this. So we're going to get very deep into it in a future episode. But I'm curious how you overcame it, because there's not many people I know that are capable of programming a phase lock loop and then modifying the Flash Floppy firmware. The list, I think, is you can count on one hand.
I didn't do that. So so I am not among the group of people who, at least currently has that as a skill set. It sounds like a fascinating one to learn.
Neither am I. I think I only know of 2 people that can do that, and that would be MX Shift and the guy who made Flash Floppy, Keith.
That's him.
How you say his name.
So the answer was really very simple. Yeah. I was having problems with the 5 1/4 inch media that I was working with. It wasn't quite reliable enough. So I modified the hardware to do the same exact write on physical 3 1/2 inch discs. Now, it wasn't quite straight up swap, and there was a lot of glitchiness because there was enough difference between an early 5 1/4 drive shoe guard drive pinout. So, and then a 3 1/2 inch floppy is standardized in a different way where, some of the signal lines had changed. And it wasn't just as simple as transferring them over. I had to do, in this condition, this is open, in this condition, this is closed. It was a lot of trial and error. But the main point of that was I tricked the AWS into writing to into formatting. This was all just doing a disk format. Into formatting a 3 1/2 inch disc as if it's the 5 1/4 that it's used to. And then I simply took a flux image of that 3 1/2 inch and then analyzed it using HXC, where you could see the timing difference at track 43. And it is at track 43. And so I simply identified why the emulator was failing. Now with that data, then I went back to the creator of the emulator and I said, hey, would you consider fixing this? Which is Kirf.
Oh, okay. So you worked with him and MX Shift has worked with him.
Yes.
Excellent. So we're getting Flash Floppy to a pretty epic point. MX Shift is actually still currently working with Kier to fine-tune the phase lock loop to work with any number of 8-inch drives out there. So the ultimate goal is to have Flash Floppy essentially be able to have a GoTech with Flash Floppy go through a simple 34-pin to 50-pin converter board.
Yes, so we have those.
So you can plug it into any 8-inch floppy. You can throw your IBM disk in there, and you can get anything. The idea is to just have it be a complete replacement for any IBM drive out there, which I think is going to be pretty epic.
And on that note, I think it's perfect. You haven't gotten to this yet, but I want to point out that at the Forgotten Machines table at VCF Southwest, which we haven't gotten to yet, I will actually have it.
We might as well get to it.
I will have a flux imaging station set up where you can actually bring any magnetic media that you can imagine. Within reason. Let's stick with the 70s and the 80s. Some of those 90s formats, we're going to refer those to somebody else because those are less forgotten. But things like 8-inch drives.
You don't want me to bring my 1960s
God,
9-track
yes,
tapes
I do,
either?
because we're going to read them right there live at VCF Southwest.
I actually have some 9-track tapes.
Seriously.
I mean, if you want to, do you have a 9-track imager there?
I do. I built it.
Oh, Jesus. I'll dig them out and we'll get some flux images of them.
Yes, we should. Exactly.
That's awesome. I got them when I got my big PDP-11 haul, so they're going to be all Digital Equipment Corporation stuff, and we might have backups of it or not, but it's worth getting backups of it because I don't actually have a drive that will read those formats. Okay, so you're gonna have a Flux Imager
Yes.
at VCF Southwest. So for anybody that doesn't know, VCF Southwest is coming up on 14,
Yes.
15, 16, 15, 16, 17? 14, 15, 16th of next month.
It's in 2 weeks, man. 2 weeks. Just about.
I know. And I'm currently in Dubai, so yeah, you can imagine how much
Well, it's in less
panic
than 2
I'm
weeks
feeling.
by the time you're watching this.
I know, right? So you're gonna have a Flux imaging station there. What else are you gonna have there? Give me a quick rundown.
Well, I'm going to have some very strange convergent technologies machines there called the AWS, which doesn't stand for Amazon Web Services. No, it stands for Advanced Workstation, and they look weird. And so I've actually had these at some other VCFs. I'm also going to have some very interesting proprietary data terminals designed by a company called Entrex. And then later bought by Nixdorf. But it has less to do with the brand and more to do with the fact that they are completely forgotten because they're data entry systems. Some people called them key to tape, some people called them key to disk. It's actually a little bit of both. And they served a very narrow time in history, and they've been completely forgotten because almost all of them have been completely scrapped, and they never got any love because they never did anything that anyone considered cool. But some of the terminals that I'm going to bring, I think, look amazing. And the fact that what they did was so boring is the reason that the shapes of them have been forgotten. I think it's just wrong. So we're going to bring both back, not only the shapes of the terminals, but also all of the intricacies of how they actually work. And so there's actually one terminal there that we call the Entrex Trapezoid that we have been working on for several years to reverse engineer because no documentation exists. So I and a small handful of other people have actually traced out the circuitry and the boards and to try to figure out how it works. And we've gotten a little bit of progress, but not all of the progress. So I'm hoping that I actually am able to hook some interested people who walk by my table and they say, well, isn't this just standard serial? And I can say, no. Here's what's different about them. Can you help us figure it out? Are you up for the challenge? And see if somebody can figure that out live and in the moment while I'm flux imaging discs for somebody else and 9-track tapes over there for somebody else. Oh, and QIC cartridges too, because that's what I started with. As I started this story, I actually started with QIC cartridges, and so decoding some early format QIC cartridges, the encoding scheme on those is actually how I taught myself how to do this with one of these devices. So you'll actually get to see my original setup there.
Yeah.
The original setup that decoded the magic data from the Vista group that ended up with us saving vehicles from Knight Rider and all that fun stuff, and go from there.
And I think, if I am not mistaken, that your booth is going to be
That
next
is
to
the
my
plan.
booth
Yes,
at VCF
we'll be
Southwest
right
this
next to
year.
each other.
And that's how it was. That's how it was last year, and that's hopefully how it's going to be this year. That's the request I made, and I was told that happened. And I'll be bringing some other interesting stuff. There is, which way do I lean here? This guy. This is the Mini Centurion. That's what I am going to be bringing. That cabinet, not the Bendix G15. That weighs 1,000 pounds. It's not going to VCF Southwest. I apologize. But the Mini Centurion cabinet with the ADS Regent 200 on it will be going. Then next to it, I should have the EDS PC, and that's going to be hooked up. It's a PC, so if you have some PC software that you want to run on it, bring a floppy disk over, and we can plug that in and run it. But most importantly, the EDS PC is going to be hooked up to the Mini Centurion as a remote data terminal. And then I think I'm going to bring another third data terminal, maybe the ADM3A, and we're going to get that hooked up to the Mini Centurion as well. So we'll have 3 data terminals hooked up to the Mini Centurion, all running multi-users. So that way we can have somebody on the general ledger, we can have somebody playing Lunar Lander, and then we can have somebody writing scripts or something like that, all happening at the same time on the same disk on the same machine. So I really want to kind of flex the multi-user muscles of the Centurion, and I think this is an excellent time to do that. We will have the multiplexer card has 4 ports on it, and I'll be filling up 3 of them. So there's going to be a 4th port available, so if somebody has some RS-232 capable terminals and a very long cable, we might be able to run that cable over to somebody else's terminal and get proper remote terminaling going on there with that. So that is what my booth is going to be set up at VCF Southwest. Since I'm on a roll, on Friday at VCF Southwest, we are doing something a little different. So I will not be at my booth on Friday. because I will instead be in a separate room with my Centurion. So the Centurion will be in that separate room with me, and I will have another CDC Hawk drive on the table in that room, and we're going to tear it apart, put a platter in it, and we are going to clean it, make sure that the heads are looking good, fly the heads, and we're going to hook it up as an additional drive to the Mini Centurion and try to format it and use it all there live in front of everybody. So if you guys want to see a Hawk drive come to pieces and hopefully come back together, come hang out with us on that one. Now there is, if getting ahead of myself, if everything goes really well and that drive spins up, there's some interesting science that we're going to do, because the Hawk drives that Centurion used are all pre-erase heads, and this Hawk drive that I'm taking is actually straddle erase. So we're really curious how having the erase head in a different place changes how data is laid down and how it's read back. We're expecting there to be problems, but we don't know what problems exactly we're going to run into. So that's my VCF Southwest spiel. I'm going to be there. AJ's going to be there. We're going to be right next to each other all day Saturday and Sunday. And Friday, AJ, I expect you to at least swing by temporarily.
I didn't realize you were doing this. I'm going to have the problem of being in two places, wanting to be in two places at once and not being able to be. So there you go. Now, didn't you do a version of this just a few months ago, last month at VCF East?
I did. The difference between what I'm doing now and what I did at VCF East is that at VCF East, that drive, there's a couple of differences. That drive was very heavily crashed. So the heads were in very rough shape. So we had to spend about an hour and a half just like lapping all four heads to get them smooth enough to fly again. This drive is not crashed, so progress should move a little faster than it did at VCF East. Also, that drive at VCF East was not I didn't have any systems there to actually test the drive. So once we got that drive powered up, spun up, and running, and we had the heads automatically load and they were flying over the disk without crashing, we hit a stopping point. We couldn't do anything with it because we didn't have a system working to run that drive. That drive originally came out of a Triad Data Systems mini computer, and they have the computer, but the computer was in non-working condition. So the hope this time is that if we can get this drive up and running, heads flying, we can plug it into a Centurion. I can go in on the diag card and we can start making the drive do things. We can, we can do RTZs, so we can make it seek the heads real quick. We can seek to a track. We can lay down data. We can read that data back, see if that works, and see if it's playing nice with the Centurion.
You have become the world expert on these 14-inch platter drives, removable platter drives and fixed platter drives. You have the modern day world expert on these things. You understand more than just about anybody else, other than the people who designed them and used them all those years ago. It's very impressive.
I would say only one specific drive I wouldn't even call me an expert. I've become moderately versed in. But it's only the Hawk drive. Like, you get me into other drives and the fundamentals are the same, but the minutiae are different.
We'll get there as we dive into the Diablos going forward. But anyway,
yes, yeah.
But the reason.
So actually, on that topic, I'm jumping in right quick. So there's two more 14-inch drives that we are going to work on the Usagi Electric channel for sure. One is the Phoenix, because I have a Phoenix here that's for the Centurion that we need to bring up, and AJ will be bringing me another Phoenix, which is pretty exciting. But AJ isn't just bringing me another Phoenix, he's bringing me a Diablo. And so the question is what am I going to do with a Diablo? Because I don't have a machine in this room that can interface with Diablo. And so that means that I just got to build a machine that will interface with the Diablo. And I just so happen to have a bunch of TMS 9900 CPUs, and I really want to build my own mini computers. So I mentioned this briefly in a previous episode, but I am slowly working on developing a homebrew mini computer based around the TMS 9900 CPU, and the ultimate goal for that is to get it to interface to a Diablo drive. So back to you, AJ. Sorry, that was my little aside in the middle of nowhere.
I wanted to use that to bring up something that about an agenda that I have in conjunction with you that I think you resist a little bit.
All right. Well, all right. I might still resist it. The fact that we're on the internet is not going to stop that.
No, exactly. But I'm a believer that with everything that you're doing with these physical drives, that there's a component that should be developing at the same time as you becoming an expert in getting these physical drives to work so fantastically and understanding how to really bring them back to life and keep them working 50 years after their useful life has ended. And that is
Okay.
no one has successfully built an emulator to emulate these drives at the actual drive level. There are emulators that are close, but I believe that
I think
Carl
Clounch is the closest.
No, he
Clounch?
is.
Carl Clounch. He's very close.
He is, and he's done so with the Diablo drive and maybe some others. And actually, I was just discussing with Nevitz on the Forgotten Machine server. Another one, somebody has recently released their development for the RKO5, and that actually seems to use some very similar architecture, but of course it's specific to the RKO5. But what they're doing is they're emulating it at the drive level, not at the computer backplane level, where the drive then becomes a replacement for the entire driver card and then is proprietary to, those machines where it's got a plug in where the driver controller card plugs in. So I really think these things, need to develop at the same time. Not because we want to start using emulated drives and forgo the awesome physical drive. Right? I'm with you on this, because a system that doesn't have a chunky 14-inch drive with a head moving around, shaking the table that it's on as part of the process.
Not just shaking the table, it distorts the image on the CRT from the magnetic field.
Even better.
You'll be able to see that happen on this machine at VCF Southwest.
We need to have that.
Yeah.
But as an important diagnostic tool and backup.
Yes and no. Yes and no. I agree with you that emulation allows machines that don't have a drive or currently have a broken drive to continue to be used. And I think that there is a place for that.
Well,
that place is not this room, but
it
there is
will
a place
definitely
for
be this room.
Yeah. However, the issue becomes that the drives themselves are so dramatically different on a massive level.
Yes.
So just talking about the Hawk drive alone, I said this earlier, you can set it up to be hard sectored from 1 to 64 sectors, and it's not a by one. It jumps around a bit, but you have like 20 options for how you want to set up hard sectoring on the machine. You can also set it up to be soft sectored. You can also change out the interface board that goes between the Hawk drive itself to interface to whatever machine that you're talking to. So the actual pins that are coming out of the drive can be dramatically or wildly different depending on who was using that drive for what. So the drive that we're going to be working on at VCF Southwest actually came out of a Wang mini computer system. So the interface board on the back of it is extremely incompatible with what the Centurion has. So I have to pull that interface board out and change it out with a spare interface board for the Centurion that I have. So if you want to emulate, just say the Hawk drive, because that's the drive that I know the most about, your hardware emulator has to be able to handle soft sectoring or hard sectoring.
Yes.
Has to be able to handle 100 tracks per inch or 200 tracks per inch, has to be able to handle different ways of writing down data depending on whether it's a pre-erase or a straddle erase type head that it's trying to emulate. Maybe that doesn't matter for emulation, I don't know. And it also has to be able to handle what kinds of output is supposed to go to the machine that it's supposed to connect up to. That's like an awful lot of requirements for a hardware emulator. It's much more difficult than say like an 8-inch floppy where you have like kind of a standard Shugart interface, and
all the more reason
things are kind of close to standard.
All the more reason that the time to do exactly that is now. That's all the more
well,
reason.
As we learn more about it, I mean, I'm not smart enough to know how to do that. Emulation is one of those things that I am.
Well,
I don't know how to do, and it has to be done on an FPGA level because you're talking about pretty fast bit rates here.
That's right. Correct. But let's actually bring in some of the closest real world examples that some viewers of this channel might actually know. And this is a device that we both have. This is the MFM Reader Emulator by David Geswine. We colloquially call it the Geswinator, just because we don't have another name for it. And why not? And it's designed to replace a much more standard, what's the opposite of the word predecessor? It's what comes after.
Successor.
Thank you very much. All right. So This is the successor to those 14-inch drives. Becomes there were 8-inch versions. I guess we'll skip right over those. But one of the ones that become much more common then is just your ST506 5.25-inch, what we commonly would call MFM hard drive. ST506 being the hardware interface, MFM being the encoding that's written on here. But this is written in such a way where it certainly emulates that hardware interface. But in software, on not even an FPGA, but a BeagleBone Black, written directly in C, David has actually, in open source format, an open source methodology, he's actually written his code to accommodate all the varying different encoding schemes and formats that can exist on these. And it's not that much more varied or much less varied than what the lineage of the list of things that you just laid out. And so, while these things are not the same.
It's not quite that. Well, first of all, let's not trivialize this, because David Guesswain is one of the smartest people I've ever met. Like, he's an absolute legend.
He's a genius.
And every time I get a chance to talk to David, it's an absolute pleasure. So let's not trivialize what he did here, because what he did is on another level. But also, I wouldn't say any, because the hard drive that's in the EDSPC is RLL, and the Guesswine-inator won't do RLL yet.
Not at this time, and I contend that it can capture it. It just can't emulate it.
But an RLL drive, physically, is almost identical to an MFM drive. As many people argue that the ST238R is physically identical to an ST225. They just built an ST225 and discovered that it had better QC than the rest, and so they made it a 238, right?
So again, with not trivializing it, but the only reason that doesn't happen is because David says I could do it, but it's not in my personal scope, which simply means that his physical device needs very little or no modification for someone else to take his open source code and run with that. So you see, the groundwork has already been laid.
That's the beauty of open source code as well. I think open source everything. That's my
and no one
has my theory. But I mean, I'm also broke, so open source everything doesn't. Maybe that's why I am broke. But yeah, David Guesswain has created an unbelievably good foundation for 5.25 drives, and it would be nice if we could build that same foundation for larger 14-inch drives.
So the reason I bring that up now is particularly in our introductory live chat session here, is because this is one of my goals, one of my agendas, and I want on some part to drag you along with me, kicking and screaming if necessary. And I just want our audiences to hear that. That's all. And get your reaction for it.
I will be kicking and screaming for sure.
Yes.
But all right. So this has gone on, I think, long enough.
Cut it off now.
If you want to yell at AJ about emulation, come to VCF Southwest, and you and I can team up against him, and we can drill down on emulation. Or if you want to yell at me about emulation, you can team up with AJ. But the truth is that we're both going to be at VCF Southwest. I will be there as Usagi Electric. AJ, you will be there
Bring these too. I'll be reading these at my table too. So bring your ST506 hard drives. I'll have the Guesswine running nonstop. So bring them.
There you go. And who are you, AJ? You are
Forgotten Machines. Look for Forgotten Machines table. That's right.
So this is David with Usagi Electric and AJ with Forgotten Machines. And just one last reminder, these types of episodes will be going up middle of the week, and they will not be replacing our standard Sunday release. They only did so this week because I am currently in Dubai. So hopefully I'll get back home safe and sound from Dubai, and we'll see all of you. Well, not all of you, because a lot of you are around the world. But we'll see some of y'all at VCF Southwest. So, AJ, thank you so much for joining me. And we'll get another one of these going with the feedback from everybody that watched. Leave your ideas and comments below. I want to know how it went. So, thank you guys, everybody, so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.